You know what you're listening to?
Is that a trick question?
It's the I Still Love This Game podcast with your host, Matthew Damian.
He's an idiot. Don't listen to this. He's an idiot.
Hello and welcome to episode 69 of the I Still Love This Game podcast. Once again, I'm recording in a hotel room, so if there's any background noise, I do apologize. But I was able to catch both the Rockets and Warriors and the Celtics and Cavs games. So let's begin, obviously, with the Warriors and Rockets game 6. And an explosive start to the game, with Houston's defense once again suffocating the vaunted Warriors offense. Houston's offense, even with Chris Paul sidelined, picked up in confidence as they put up 39 points in the first quarter alone. And really, that's what makes what happened next more remarkable. It's one thing to be demolished in Golden State. God knows how many times that's happened over the past 4 years. But it's another to only score 86 points in a game after putting up 39 in the first quarter alone. I'm still shaking my head in disbelief just talking about it. They only had 25 points in the second half. The Warriors had 64. That's nearly a 40-point difference. And what was also surprising is it was the Splash Brothers who did most of the damage. It wasn't even Kevin Durant. Those two combined for 64 points and 14 threes alone. Kevin Durant continued to struggle from a production standpoint with 23 points on 6 of 17 shooting. But the attention that he gets defensively is a big cause for Thompson and Curry to get room to operate with and without the ball. Now for Thompson, this was almost deja vu. The last time the Warriors found themselves down 3-2 was against Oklahoma City in the conference finals in 2016. In Game 6 of that series, he had the game of his life with 41 points and 11 threes. This game against the Rockets wasn't quite as dramatic or as spectacular, but it really wasn't that far off it. So now, obviously, we get what we all wanted. And that's the 7th game between the Rockets and Warriors. And there's so much to go over. Let's start with Chris Paul. From the moment he was ruled out for Game 6, everyone's focus was Game 7. Now, hamstrings are tricky, especially for perimeter players. You can expect his minutes to be somewhat reduced and to have shorter stints, but also expect the Warriors to go right at him and test him defensively. The Rockets will have to view anything that he gives them as merely a bonus. If they're expecting him to carry them, they won't stand a chance. Now, what Paul can provide them, even in a semi-limited state, is stability offensively. When Golden State made their push in the second half, the Rockets' offense imploded, and they began to take forced shots regularly. The other significant thing is for this game to be officiated much differently. I lost count of how many times I saw Harden or Eric Gordon get fouled multiple times when driving. The Warriors won't get away with that consistently in Houston. Now, the one positive you can take away from Game 6 if you're the Rockets was James Harden finally making some outside shots. And that's really it. It was a disastrous performance, don't get me wrong. But he finally did break through. It had been, since, I believe, the first half of Game 4 that he had made a 3. And he did make 4, I think it was 4 of 12, but he got off to a good start. So hopefully, if you're the Rockets, that will translate into Game 7. But as I said, beyond that, there was no other positives. And with that in mind, it goes without saying that the momentum is completely with the Warriors. And you would assume that Iggy would play in Game 7. But I was shocked that he didn't suit up for Game 6. So either it's a much more serious injury than we thought, or they've got balls of steel and supreme confidence to sit him in an elimination game. Even though it was at home and Chris Paul was out, still, you've got to have a lot of self-belief to do that one. And if he does play, and Chris Paul is only at 50 or 60%, then the Warriors, especially the way that Curry and Thompson played in Game 6, they have to be the favourites. But the way obviously the Splash Brothers I'm still referring to, the way that they've been inconsistent, there's absolutely no guarantee that they will back up what they just did. Now, at the end of the day, this has to be James Harden's moment to shine. It's the 7th game, so there'll be no real strategy changes. Both teams are very familiar with each other. But for the Rockets, Harden has not lived up to MVP level expectations. It's just that simple. He has to stand up and show the world how good of a player he is if Houston is to have any real shot. And with that, my prediction is the Rockets. This will be a close game. I'm not saying it will be a blowout. I actually think it may go into overtime or be decided in the last 30 seconds or a minute. And the Rockets, they're not a joke. I mean, they showed today that when they are pushed with their backs up against the wall, forget about the entire game. Just remember that stat that I gave you before where they outscored them in the second half by 40 points. Oh, okay, 39 points, nearly 40 points. So they have to be taken seriously. But at some point, Harden needs to take over. And I think he does it at home in Game 7. Now, speaking of a player standing up and taking over and showing the world how good he is, LeBron was spectacular in Game 6 against the Celtics. He put up 46 points, 11 rebounds, 9 assists, 3 steals, and 1 block. Now, it needs to be pointed out that this was done against the 2018 Celtics, a team that is young and depleted, and they're not a great defensive ball club, at least individually. But still, 46, 11, 9, 3, and 1. Any way you look at it, that is just incredible. Now, as jaw-dropping as that performance was, and other games in this series that he has produced as well, this series has been quite boring. The games have lacked in drama. Now, expect that to change if the Cavs have any hope of winning this series, because Boston plays with a lot more confidence at home than they do on the road. They're not just going to roll over easily and allow this to be a blowout. If this was in Cleveland, then yeah, I could see that happening, but not in Boston. The other significant storyline is the impact of the role players for Cleveland. Kevin Love is out again with a concussion, so a huge burden will fall onto the shoulders of Nance, Green, and George Hill. Those players did step up big for them in Game 6, but if you're expecting them to do that again in Game 7 and once again in Boston, that might be a tall order. It might also be time for J.R. Smith to contribute. Now, if they all produce and LeBron has another great game, that'll be enough for them to get over the line. And I think that's exactly what happens. As I said before, Boston will not go quietly at home. But it's been remarkable that the Celtics have gotten this far. And I honestly think they've extracted all they can from what they've got available. Realistically, their only hope is if they wear down LeBron for the 3rd time this series. Obviously, Game 1, Game 5, and this will be Game 7. But you'd be courageous if you would call that. I'm not going to call that. And I think LeBron gets them over the line and they make the finals again. Now, we've got plenty of time to go over some questions, so let's begin with, of course, a Jordan versus LeBron one. But this is actually a decent question. I like this question a lot. What would happen if Jordan was to match up with LeBron? LeBron in his prime, Jordan is in his prime. Match it up for us. Now, it's not so easy to simply match it up for you like that, because basketball is a team game. So I don't want to sound like I'm doing a cop-out here. I'm just saying let's apply some context. So Jordan in his prime, is he with Scottie Pippen? And if he is with Scottie Pippen, how much help can Scottie Pippen provide? The same with LeBron James. Is he alongside Dwayne Wade? How much help can Dwayne Wade provide? How much help can, what kind of a factor would Chris Bosh play or Dennis Rodman play? And that's assuming that Jordan's prime is actually in 96 when he's got Rodman. Is it in 93 when he's got Horace Grant, for example? So there are a lot of factors. But let's just assume for 1 second that there's no help. There's no help on either side. You don't have any screens. It's just ISO, 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 which isn't too far from what we're seeing now anyway. And you know what? Let's go in today's rules as well. So the hand checking is virtually non-existent. They call it touch fouls, things of that nature. So let's just go that these two are matched up in a playoff series, best out of 7. What would happen? And it's a good question, because once again, I'm having trouble even defining what LeBron's prime is. Offensively, it's this season. There's no question about that. But there's two sides of basketball. There's offense and defense, right? So if you take that into account, it's what he was doing in Miami. And if we're going back to Miami, yeah, he had some big performances, but man, was he inconsistent in Miami. But for the sake of argument, let's just go with what he's doing now. Because I'm getting the impression that a lot of fans of LeBron now probably don't even remember what he was doing in Miami. And I'm not saying that to be condescending. It's just they've got a memory of a goldfish if they were around back then. Because some of the questions that come my way is like they've got no real knowledge base of his career. But let's go with what he's doing now. Okay, so he's fantastic in getting the ball up top, right? And I'm going to say Jordan's prime was around 91, 92, 93. Because that's when he was winning as well as putting up huge numbers. And he was doing it within the confines of a team. So if LeBron's getting the ball at the top of the key, and once again, as I said, I'm not going to include Pippen or any of the help defense of the Bulls. I'm not going to include Kevin Love or the spacing of Kyle Korver or anything like that. It's just these guys are matched up with each other and there's very little help. And this goes on both sides of the ball too, not just when Jordan is guarding him. I'm not going to have Jordan with no help and then when Jordan's got the ball, then LeBron has all the help in the world. That'd be just silly. LeBron gets the ball at the top of the key. Jordan, I would say, would be right up on him. And obviously we've heard Jordan actually say that he would force him left more than anything because he knows where he's going to go when he goes left. And the same when he goes right, he goes right to the rim when he's driving right. When he's going left, he typically will pull up for a jumper. So Jordan would easily, that's the first thing you could expect with it. But I would also expect Jordan to throw his body into LeBron. People talk about the size of LeBron, and they're right. He is big. I don't know how big he is because, it depends on what day of the week. Some people say he's 250, some say he's 260s, 270, 275, 265. I mean, make your mind up. Step on the scales and just tell us how much you weigh, right? Anyway, the point that I'm making is LeBron is bigger, right? But Jordan was a very, very strong player. He was, 215, 220 around, the 91 to 93 era, where they won 3 championships in a row. And he wasn't a light 215. He was built. He was as ripped as you could possibly imagine. So he would play LeBron a lot more physical than anyone else is playing right now. For example, he's a lot stronger than, say, a Jaylen Brown is that we're seeing right now. Plus, his hands are incredibly big, and his grip strength is something that is talked about quite a lot from Phil Jackson to Ahmad Rashad to Tim Grover when they've seen this guy work out. Now, you might be thinking, what the hell am I talking about with grip strength? This is very important because the way that Jordan played defense, and you see it in today's game, there's a lot of maneuvering with players with their non-dominant hand, say the left hand, on the hip of a player when they're facing up, or even when they're driving. Now, how much that is called is usually how much their arm will extend, and then the ref will have to make a call. But because of Jordan's grip strength, he doesn't have to involve other muscles like his shoulders or his biceps or his triceps in order to make that effective. Because his grip strength is so strong, or was so strong, he can impact LeBron's drive and direct him where he wants him to go without extending his arm. That's very important. The other thing to note is LeBron's ability to get his shoulder into a player and rock him back. I'm not sure, because Jordan's foot speed was incredibly quick. If he does that, Jordan will be in position. And if he does try to rock him back, a lot of the times these calls that are on the defender are offensive fouls, but the refs can get away with not calling it as an offensive foul. They call it as a defensive foul because the defender is set for half a second or a millisecond. And that's a way that, it's such a bang-bang call that, a lot of people, including myself, will accept that because it is a bang-bang call. But Jordan's foot speed was up there with Gary Payton's as one of the quickest perimeter defenders of all time. So because of that foot speed, he should get there significantly quicker than a Jaylen Brown or a Jason Tatum or whoever. And if LeBron is lowering his shoulder, they've got to make that call. They've got to call that an offensive foul. Now, what LeBron can do at that situation, because of his size, is theoretically post him up. Now, if he posts him up, Jordan was an excellent post defender, but we never saw Jordan go up against someone this size. And LeBron has been an incredible post scorer over the last 2 seasons, especially this season. But the last 2 seasons, he has shown signs, and this is why I was so frustrated with him in last year's finals, where all he wanted to do was face up Durant. Put him in the post. Go in the post, get to the rim, put some pressure on his lower body strength. Now, Jordan was pretty strong, so I don't expect LeBron to just abuse the guy in the post. It's not like Shaq versus Todd McCullough in the 2002 NBA Finals. But I think that might be his best advantage. Also, you can sort of slow the game down, and if there is help, then you can pick that apart, kind of like what Hakeem Olajuwon did. LeBron's an excellent passer. So that's what I think would happen. So how effective would LeBron be? He'd still get his points. Don't get me wrong. He's too good of a player to not get his points. Even when Jordan was going up against Clyde Drexler in the 92 finals, Drexler still put up, quite a lot of points. But the thing is, Drexler only shot 40% from the field. And that's a big key. I think LeBron's, you wouldn't see these 17 of 21 field goals from LeBron up against Jordan. You would see him shoot, if he's lucky, around the 50% mark. Because Jordan would just wear him down. Now, a Stanima standpoint, and this, it has to be acknowledged. Because if we're going to use the excuse, or if LeBron James fans are going to use the excuse, LeBron's just tired at this time of the year because he's had to do so much. Well, when he has to do even more against someone as good as Jordan, then surely that stamina will come into play. So that needs to be taken into account too. I don't see Jordan slowing down. I think Jordan would smell blood if he started to see LeBron wearing down. So that's what I would see on that end of the court. Defensively, LeBron versus Jordan. Oh, this would be bad. This would be real bad. Because Jordan, look, LeBron is big, but he's not physical. He is definitely not physical. And if Jordan was able to put up 30, 35 points per game in big playoff series up against the Knicks, up against the Detroit Pistons, up against the Portland Trail Blazers, real tough teams inside, right? Then what would he do up against LeBron James, who's not a physical defender? The only drama you could possibly say is if Jordan gets out on the break and LeBron's trying to chase him down. But Jordan was a hell of he was a very quick player. I don't think LeBron would chase him down. Maybe if there's like 1 or 2 steps in between them. But if there's like a 5-step difference, Jordan's not going to slow up for him. Jordan's just going to finish that and head back on defense. I don't think this would really end all that great for LeBron. The only thing that I could see that would happen in LeBron's favor is, of course, if we're playing in today's rules, then you'd see a lot of moving screens. Because you do see a lot of moving screens in today's game, whether it's the Warriors or the Rockets or even the Cavs. And they're trying to get the defenders they want. I think it would be in the Cavs' best interest to try to get Jordan away from LeBron defensively. So you see screen after screen. Now, whether Jordan will be able to navigate over those screens, and he was actually very good at navigating over those screens. What comes to mind is Game 7 of the 98 conference finals up against the Pacers, when the Pacers had a 15-point lead. Reggie Miller was going very well. Ron Harper was guarding him. And they made the switch with Jordan now guarding Reggie Miller, and Jordan was able to navigate those screens from the Davises and also Rick Smiths very well. But those weren't moving screens. So how well Jordan will be able to navigate those moving screens will be critical. Because then LeBron will be able to just go one-on-one with whoever, the screener is. Now, or not the screener, but the screener's defender. Now, if we're talking the Bulls, though, right, depending on which year, regardless, Horace Grant was a pretty good perimeter defender. Think back to the 93 finals. Everyone talks about that Paxson shot that won the series for them. But the final play of that game was Horace Grant actually switching out onto Kevin Johnson getting into the lane and Horace Grant blocking his shot when he was actually guarding him. It wasn't a help defense situation. He actually switched onto him and he was able to recover and block the shot. Kevin Johnson may well have made that shot if it wasn't blocked. So that's not an ideal situation, but I'm sure if you're the Cavs, you would prefer Horace Grant guarding or switched up on LeBron than Michael Jordan. As I said before, it might sound like I was glossing over it, but defensively, LeBron gets absolutely eviscerated in this matchup. Now, if we're talking the 2013, 2012 LeBron, he still gets torched, because we saw that happen consistently, whether it was Paul George or Paul Pierce. Kawhi Leonard did it as well before he was an All-Star. We saw Iguodala do it as well. You know, he put up 15, 16 points and shooting 60% from the field. We saw, of course, Jason Terry, what he was able to do. So the point that I'm making is, even though some of these guys, one of them's definitely a Hall of Famer in Paul Pierce, the other guys, you know, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George maybe as well, they're not the offensive talents of what Michael Jordan was. So if those guys were able to be effective up against LeBron, then just imagine what Jordan would be. And that's when LeBron was at his defensive peak. He's nowhere near his defensive peak right now. So, as I said, I don't want to make it sound like I'm glossing over that. I think that's the biggest... I would, you know, I don't think Jordan would hit 6 threes on him, but it would be Drexler versus Jordan all over again. And in many ways, LeBron's game reminds me a bit of Drexler's. And that's a topic for another day, because people might think that's disrespectful, but it's really not, because Drexler was an incredible player. But LeBron people want to say that LeBron's a hybrid of Karl Malone and Magic Johnson. But I don't see the Karl Malone in him. You know, the only Karl Malone in him is his actual body size. But in terms of athleticism, it kind of reminds me a little bit more of Clyde Drexler. But anyway, that's how I think it would happen. I think LeBron would probably be his toughest individual matchup that we saw, at least from an athletic standpoint. But I still think it ends up in a bad outcome for LeBron. I don't see the whole lot of advantages there for LeBron in that series. Next question is asking, do I give more credibility to the players who played the game? And I'm assuming you mean for like when ex-players make comments. And it's kind of, yeah, I do, because they played. But at the same time, the game and media is so political. I can see when people, they're just as susceptible to lying and trying to spew out BS to make themselves look better as well. For example, I just mentioned him, Clyde Drexler. Clyde Drexler says that LeBron is better than Jordan, right? Because, quote unquote, Jordan played with Hall of Famers and we won't remember anybody that LeBron played with. Now, normally, if he just said that I think that LeBron is better than Jordan because he's a more complete player or something, even though I could argue that he isn't, I'd respect that a hell of a lot more than what he just said. Because just think about it. He's saying that Jordan played with Hall of Famers. He played with 2 of them, right? Dennis Rodman, who was off the scrap heap, need I remind you. The Spurs didn't want him. That was his current team. And no other team was interested in him, apart from the Milwaukee Bucks, who weren't even a playoff team. Those were the 2 teams that were interested in him. Of course, he was interested in Chicago because they had a much better chance of competing. And he was only really good for the 96 season. People forget that. The Bulls couldn't even play him in 97 because he kept getting incredibly soft technical fouls called on him, and he was even getting ejected. He had a streak in the 97 playoffs. I'm not sure what it was at, but it was double digits in games that he was getting a technical. He was getting tossed out of games left, right, and center. The Bulls could not rely on him. The same with the 98 run. You know, he was coming off the bench for the up against the series against the Utah Jazz. And yes, he did do a pretty good job on Malone, but he was a bench player. Now, Scottie Pippen was also a Hall of Famer, but I find it a little bit coincidental that suddenly Scottie Pippen is romanticized by LeBron fans so they can try to drag Jordan's accomplishments down. Oh, he didn't win without Scottie Pippen. He sucked. What was his playoff record without Scottie Pippen? The point I'm making is those are the 2 Hall of Famers that Jordan played with, right? So what Clyde Drexler was saying and I'm going verbatim, I don't have it in front of me, but what Clyde Drexler was saying is that Jordan played with Hall of Famers. Technically, he's right. He played with 2 of them. But to say that LeBron played with a bunch of guys we won't remember, are you kidding me? What about Dwayne Wade? He played with Shaq. People want to say, oh, Shaq was old. Well, okay, if Shaq was old, then so was Dennis Rodman. Okay? So those are 2 right there. You can also throw in Kyrie Irving. He will probably be in the Hall of Fame. Same with Chris Bosh. If Chris Bosh doesn't get into the Hall of Fame, it will be an injustice. Same with Kevin Love. How many is that there? Shaq, Dwayne Wade, Kevin Love, Chris Bosh, Kyrie Irving. That's 6. That's unbelievable. How could you? And that's when they lose credibility, because then at that point you've got to say, well, why is he even saying that? Because he's an ex-player. He's got to know who's worthy of a Hall of Famer. He's a Hall of Famer himself. So why would he be saying it? It's got to be political. He's got to be still butthurt over the fact that Jordan served him up so badly in the 92 finals. And I would, I don't want to psychoanalyze anybody, but when somebody is that wrong, factually, you've got to wonder what their motives are. So to answer the question, do I give players more credibility who played the game? Or people more credibility who have played the game? Sure, if they aren't so agenda-driven. That's the point I'm trying to make. If they clearly have their own agenda, and they're trying to make themselves look better, or bring down players that completely dominated them, which in a roundabout way makes them look bad, you would think that they would try to elevate those players that they played against, especially if those players dominated them. If they were not so good and they dominated them, well, what does that say about them? But anyway, to answer the question, it all depends on whether if it's just opinion and it's not so clearly wrong, then yes, I do give them more credibility than somebody who hasn't played the game. We have time for one last question, and the question is, can I explain the truth behind Jordan's gambling suspension? Oh boy. This gets me angry. This really gets me angry. Because he was never suspended for gambling. I can't. The people have tried to compare this to Pete Rose's gambling. Jordan used to gamble on cards. He used to gamble on golf. But there was never any evidence or any link that he gambled on games whatsoever. And people have come up with these stupid conspiracy theories that because these allegations arose in 92, and of course they really hit the mainstream media in 93 during the playoffs, and that his gambling, that it was much worse than it was first thought. So David Stern suspended him, wink wink, nudge nudge, off the books for the 94 and the majority of the 95 season. It's just unbelievable because there's absolutely no evidence for this whatsoever. All it is crazy conspiracy theories, and it's once again to further diminish Jordan's legacy. If you look at it, right, and I hate to bring this up, but Jordan's father was murdered in the 1993 offseason, just after they won their third championship. And he had talked with his father about potentially retiring and obviously going to play baseball. Now, when people say, well, he ended up doing that anyway. But Jordan was a big sort of what-if sort of talker. Even think back to his Hall of Fame speech where he said, hey, I might return when I'm 50 to play in the NBA. And then he said, don't laugh. I may just do it. And everyone, of course, laughed. And they laughed even more when he told them not to laugh. So he's been known to sort of say things at times that he doesn't follow through on. Now, I think probably him going to play baseball was one of those things up until his father was murdered. And you've just got to think back to how late it was in the off-season. It was 2 weeks before training camp that he actually announced his retirement. And he gave no one else a heads up. There was people pretty high up in the Bulls that had no idea. Tim Grover, his head trainer, who was not hired by the Bulls, but he was Jordan's personal trainer, he was in Africa, and he had no idea. And because it was in Africa, it wasn't, easily accessible via phone. He had no idea. It wasn't until he came back. And it was a week later, so the news sort of died down a little bit, but he was in shock. He had no idea what to make of it. So he didn't even know. And Tim Grover was one of his lead confidants at that stage. So Jordan retired, and it had so much more to do with his father's death than anything else. Maybe a burnout, sure. But the whole accusations of gambling, as I said before, it's just to try to diminish Jordan's legacy and saying that he wasn't a good guy, or he's like a Pete Rose, or he was protected by the league, or give me a break. Just give me a break. All right? Because if Jordan's gambling accusations were as bad to warrant being suspended for an entire year. Keep in mind that Latrell Sprewell wasn't even suspended for an entire year when he choked PJ Carlissimo. Ron Artest was not suspended for an entire year after he ran into the stands. He was suspended for the rest of the season, but not the entire year. So for all of a sudden, Jordan's, it would have had to be some pretty full-on gambling accusations and evidence behind doing so for him to get that kind of a suspension. And as I said, it's kind of disgusting that fans gravitate to that. And they will argue that you'll find fans will go to extraordinary lengths to try and, legitimize this. But when you start asking questions like, well, why would he be suspended for it that much? Or what about the impact of his father dying that he actually went and played baseball? Or why would he be suddenly welcomed back mid-season because of that? They've got no answers for it. And that's when you know that it's completely flawed. Anyway, guys, those questions took a distinctly odd turn. I'm going to wrap it up there, though, because I do have to head out. As I said, we got some Game 7s, 2 Game 7s. I cannot remember the last time we've had 2 Game 7s. We were close in 2002 when we had the Lakers and Kings, and then, of course, we had the Celtics and Nets, and the Celtics and Nets went 6. Obviously, the Kings and Lakers went to 7. But we've got 2 Game 7s. They're going to be incredible. Depending on how big of a game and how big of a performance it is by both teams, we may have an episode following the Celtics and Cavs. If it's kind of like a ho-hum, yeah, we kind of saw that coming. There's not much to talk about there. I'm not going to bother with it, and then we'll just have a super episode and, of course, an NBA Finals preview as well. Following the Rockets and the Warriors Game 7. Now, I have a massive, very important meeting with the US Consulate. No, I'm not kidding either. On Tuesday morning, my time. And once that's all taken care of, I'll be watching the game, but I'll probably on the road. I'll try and get the recording out as soon as possible, obviously, to you guys. But if there is a delay, I do apologize. Regardless, enjoy the games. You've got back-to-back Game 7s in the conference finals, which is a very, very rare situation. So enjoy them. Thanks for listening, and I hope to, and I'll catch up with you guys soon. Thank you.